Yeah. For a lot of us, this is the first time that we're kind of captains of our own faith life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's, I would imagine, more or less your life. So do you have any advice for us who are now kind of in charge of running our relationship with God by ourselves?
It's interesting because one of the things I find myself talking a lot about is how what we do as Catholic Christians isn't simply the time you spend sitting in a church building, because that doesn't make you a Christian. You know, I mean, it's there to support a Christian lifestyle, but what you're doing with all the rest of the time you're not in a church building is where your Christianity is really being lived.
Right.
You come together, we worship together, we've got some community life together. But what you do at home, what you do at work, what you do at school, what you do on the freeway, at the grocery store, what you're doing in all these other environments is really where your faith is being lived out.
Mm-hmm.
So because you don't have the church component of it right now, it's like we have to be more intentional about the other component of our faith, which is how we behave in public,
right,
praying with our families, being generous and patient with other people. And I think maybe not having access to the sacraments is forcing people to have to think about what it means to be a Christian, because it can't mean going into the building.
Yeah.
Bishop McFarland used to say, "You are no more a Christian because you sit in a church than you are a Cadillac because you sit in the garage."
Right. Yeah. That's true. That is what it kind of made me think when you're talking about it. It's almost like when I have plenty of gas in the tank,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think about where I'm driving or if the AC's on or anything.
Right.
But all of a sudden when I'm running low, or if I know there's not a gas station for a while, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, okay, let's roll the windows down. Let's make sure we're going straight there. Is there a hill in the way? I don't know. Maybe you guys fill up more often than I do, but that's the stress. And it's kind of like that in our faith life right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we don't get to come back every Sunday and refill. We need to be much more intentional about the route that we're taking through our lives.
And where you're finding the filling going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it has to be your personal prayer life or your family prayer life,
Mm-hmm.
or the things that you read, or the scripture study that you do, or stuff that you watch on the internet. I mean, good stuff, Christian stuff that you're watching on the internet, so that you're continuing to fill with something graceful. I mean, some people, there are parishes that are offering daily live stream mass, so you can go to mass. Literally, you can go to mass every day of the week if you want to. All you can't do is get communion. So the closest you get to physically receiving communion is the spiritual communion. So like when I do the Sunday mass, after I receive communion, I recite the act of spiritual communion and ask people to pray after me. And we go through this process of saying, I love you, Lord, and I wish I could receive you in communion, but I can't right now. So help me to know that you are present with me even now, without the Eucharist, and help me to never be separated from you. Because I think that's part of it. Is I think people feel separated from Jesus because they feel separated from the Eucharist. But he's not separated from us. There's the sacramental experience that we're separated from.
Yeah.
But spiritually, Christ has always been as present as he ever has been. We're just not as aware of it because this one element has been taken out of the picture. I've become aware how much I've been a priest for over 30 years, and I've become aware of how much I take my own priesthood for granted. The very fact that I can celebrate Mass whenever I want and receive communion and nobody else can.
Right.
I mean, that's a big deal.
It didn't used to be a big part of your kit that was really awesome or anything.
Yeah.
Because we could all get Mass. Whenever.
Right.
But all of a sudden now you're like, whoa.
I have always known that there's something I can do you can't do because I'm ordained and you're not. But there's still this whole element of, my gosh, there is an element of Catholicism that is heavily influenced by the presence of priests celebrating sacraments.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty hard to have a church without guys dressed like this.
And even coming together, this has brought up a lot of one of my favorite things about the Catholic faith is all the different contradictions that really challenge you throughout it. One of them we were just talking about, which is that we as Catholics know that, or we would have assumed that the sacraments are an essential part of our daily life as a Catholic. But we're learning that God is just as great in spite of us not being able to receive sacraments.
God is not limited by the action of a sacrament.
Yeah. He can still do all of his normal stuff in spite of it, which is kind of a great thing. Then there's the other one that you're kind of talking about right now, which is kind of the as Catholics, we've always kind of defined ourselves as by coming together, whether it's with the priest or in the different groups that we meet in, all the times that we come together. But we've always known that our private prayer life is just as important. And now we're really having to lean on that.
Exactly.
And we're having to look at, okay, what does my private prayer life look like?
Right.
Where am I getting fed in that way? Where am I, able to still kind of express my faith in that way in a private sense? And it's kind of...
And I think if prior to this whole quarantine thing, if people didn't have a very strong prayer life, personal prayer life, and suddenly they're having to lean on something that isn't very strong, it'd be like trying to lean on a broken cane, It's not there to give you that support, and now all of a sudden I think a lot more people have kind of started scrambling for devotions they can pray or content on the internet that they can watch. There's a lot more people watching Catholic television or listening to Catholic radio than there was before, because people are looking for content they never really thought that they needed before. And all of a sudden, wait a minute, my prayer life is almost non-existent, and it's got to be better than this if I'm going to survive this. Yeah.
The good news about the prayer life is that it is just the connection to God. And we know at least God is there. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
That even if our prayer life is weak, that there is a all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing, all-loving God. Right. Just sitting there staring at you like, well, let's do it now.
Right. It doesn't matter whether you think your communication stinks or not, because God's still in love with you. When it would be like, you're talking to one of your little kids and their communication skills aren't that great. Yeah. But you still want them to talk to you, and you want them to see that you're listening. Yeah. And I think God's the same way. It's like He's not looking for, really erudite, high theology kinds of conversations or deep silences of just basking in God's grace. It's great if you can ever have those sort of moments, but really, God just wants to hear from us. And He's not looking for always rote prayer. That's a good place to start, but it needs to go into something that's a little bit more personal and not just, I'm gonna throw 50 Hail Marys at you. The rosary is a good place to start, but it's at some point I need to be able to open my own heart and mind to God, not because He doesn't already know what's in my heart and mind, because He does. Having a good prayer life benefits me. It's not informing God about something He didn't know. It's developing a discipline within me so that I can communicate better with the God that loves me. And that's the same thing with any kind of communication. You want your children's communication to be childlike. You don't expect them to sound like Einstein when they're talking to you. Yeah. But God's the same way. It's like you could be 58 years old and talk to me like a child, because that's fine. That's where you're at. That's all your prayer life has been able to develop to this point. That's fine. I'm going to move it further.
Yeah. That's the beautiful part about it, because, going with the metaphor of a child and a father, it never really affects the relationship at all that the child is really bad at essentially everything. Because the father is there, right. And if the child is just screaming and that's all it is, well, God figures that out too, it all.
Yeah, I think God gets a lot of screaming from us.
He does. I think even our best days probably just seem like screaming.
There's a lot of tantrums, and there's a lot of, this isn't fair, and there's a lot of, why don't you do something about this? And God's like, that's okay, I understand.
Yeah, it sounds like many chapters of the Bible.
Yeah, and it's believe me, I know everything that's going on here, and I've got a way to get you through it. Yeah, because little kids don't get that, when they're having a hard time or when they're in pain or whatever, you can't fix all of that. All you can do is be there with them through it. And I think that's where, again, whether or not we can receive the Eucharist to know that God is with us in our difficult times with the coronavirus or whatever. It's our prayer life is going to be the only thing that makes the difference of whether or not we have a sense that God's going to get us through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's always been for me, I take great solace, especially during the tougher times, which, we're living through some of those right now, that I'm the child in that situation.
Right.
Because it's so great being the child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just nice to know. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to know. I don't have to know the way.
There's not a lot of expectations.
I don't need to repair any of this. I just need to scream, and then God's going to take care of it,
Mm-hmm.
Which is, that's the position to be in, I think, if we were to choose one.
Well, and that's like, for me, it's the same sort of thing, because on one level, I'm the pastor, I'm the shepherd, but really, I'm just a sheep. I'm a sheep like everybody else. I'm part of a larger flock that, granted, I'm mixing my metaphors. In some sense, I'm a pastor. In other senses, I'm a sheep. And I have to go back and forth between those roles. But you do too, as a parent, that you are a sheep of the flock, but you are also the shepherd of a flock. Yeah, so. And I mean, to be fair, Jesus mixed his metaphors last weekend too. He sure did. I'm the gate, and then he's like, but they hear my voice. I'm the shepherd and the gate. Okay.
All right. It must be a mystery, because we know he wasn't wrong. So.
It just depends on the facet you're looking at at the moment.
It does. All right.